We got one more guest here for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number one on Twitter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Adam, doing all right, man. How about yourself?
Doing very well, bud. Appreciate the time as always. And again, for our listeners here that listen on a segment-by-segment basis, Blog Talk Radio up to some shenanigans today. Had to call back in with my cell phone, so that explains the difference here in the sound quality and how I sound. But in any event, Wes, NBA trade deadline. A lot of dominoes falling last night. The NBA is a hard enough league as it is, but the trade deadline really does make it much more difficult.
Yeah, you really got to be, I think, picky in your spots, especially, I mean, in the NBA in general, and I find that I'm having to do that a little bit more because, for the NBA season, I've basically been trading money, would win a couple days and then lose it back and then win and then lose. And, like last night, just happened to be a good spot, the result notwithstanding, with the Pacers, who had been really struggling. And then they got 2 wins on the road before coming home, and then they get the Lakers in town. And, a lot of these teams, especially some of the smaller and middle market teams, when you get a team like the Lakers, you're going to have people in your crowd that are going to be wearing Laker gear, and that's probably like that for a lot of the middle market teams. And I think that kind of motivates a team. And, I mean, I was just listening yesterday just kind of on my commute into work, and every national show was talking about this potential Lakers trade for Anthony Davis. And, I mean, it was like the Lakers were topic A. I mean, we're just a couple days removed from the Super Bowl, and everybody was talking about the Lakers. And I think that's going to motivate a team like the Pacers, and you saw the results and you saw that kind of that thinking bear fruit last night. And there's just so much drama around some of these teams, and there always is around the Lakers when you have LeBron James involved, and then all of a sudden, who was really quiet, LeVar Ball pops up and says, "Oh, I don't want my son to go to New Orleans," and and it's just, I mean, it's got to be, with all the media focus on that team, there's always a little bit of a soap opera to it, but it's got to be, as great as LeBron is, and as much as he has never had a sniff of trouble off the court and all the great things you can say about LeBron James, you can also say something else that's true, is that he's kind of a pain in the ass to deal with sometimes. And in fact, a lot of the time. Because, I mean, he's obviously had a say in some of the personnel that's been brought into this team. And, kind of everywhere he's went, he does well when he's there, and he's in both the markets he's been in Cleveland and Miami, he's won a championship. But when he leaves the party, the team, the organization's in total disarray. And, I mean, you're seeing a little bit of that with the Lakers, and you're seeing some of these teams that are trying to position themselves. And it's so interesting with the NBA, and we've talked about this several times to revisit a topic, is that it really is a soap opera. I mean, we're already talking about, we're in the thrust of the season where we're not even really to the All-Star break. And we're already talking about where dominoes are going to be next year, whether it's Kyrie Irving, whether it's Anthony Davis, or other various star players. And it's just a different league. We talked about a little bit how the Warriors have kind of changed the way the game is played, and it's kind of a copycat league in that regard. But also in terms of off the court and these teams that are trying to position themselves, or these teams, like New Orleans, who are maybe willing to give up a star player, but they're not going to give him away. I mean, they want cap relief because they don't want to be bad for 5 years. So, there's just a lot of different spots. It's a daily soap opera, and I think, a lot of that is contributed to by ESPN, which has become, I think more of an NBA network than it really has like an NFL network, kind of like Fox has done. So, I mean, with a daily show and talking about this and who's posting what on Instagram, and, Kobe talking about James Harden yesterday. So, it is very difficult to find spots. And I think, you really have to be picky. NBA is, I think, a sport where volume, unless you're solely concentrating on the NBA in terms of your betting right now, with fall being over, it's very tough to find, to play more than a couple games on a card a night.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, at least for the Lakers, LeBron hasn't gotten Luke Walton fired yet, so at least there's that. But, yeah, I mean, it's LeBron's team. The second he joins that team, it is his team. He's the GM. He's the coach. In some respects, he has, maybe some, ownership-like autonomy. So, if LeBron wants the Lakers to go get somebody, they probably should do it. And, will that be Anthony Davis? Will that be somebody else? Will that be a reunion with Kyrie Irving? Who knows? But as you said, I think that's a big takeaway here, is that this is a big-time soap opera, for a lot of these teams. But let's look at a team like the Philadelphia 76ers here, who I think made a really strong trade getting Tobias Harris. Now, of course, there's only one basketball to go around, and that was kind of a concern, with Jimmy Butler joining the team. But I think as long as you load up on good players, you kind of figure out how to use them. The question is, how long does it take Philadelphia to learn how to use another guy, who's primarily at his best as a scoring threat?
Yeah, and, and I think this move was kind of bold, I guess, for Philadelphia in terms of, number one, the East is still fairly wide open. I mean, there is not, I don't think, a clear consensus favorite in the East, and obviously the Pacers with the Oladipo injury have kind of fallen out of that, I think, Eastern Conference title contender category. But, I mean, you've still got Toronto, you've still got Boston, you've still got, obviously Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and you have all of these teams that, have had their ups and have had their downs, and, I mean, where they have different struggles, and they have maybe some deficiencies and some holes. So there's not really a clear favorite. So I think, Philadelphia is kind of wanting to compete now. But I think it's also a little bit of an insurance policy, in case Jimmy Butler goes and takes that money somewhere else, whether, who's going to have money, whether it's New York or somebody else, to have somebody kind of in place that Harris is not a free agent and still has another year or so on his contract. I mean, I have not looked, I'll admit that, but that's kind of what I think that they are doing a little bit, trying to get a little bit of an insurance policy for long term as well.
Well, and that's one of the things too about the trade deadline. I mean, I'm not a big NBA guy. And there are so many salary cap loopholes and mid-level exemptions and protected picks and a lot of different things that kind of skew the trade market a little bit, especially, as you mentioned, we've mentioned a few times already, salary cap considerations and, what some of these deals mean. And, some guys get waived and then you get, some assistance and relief with the cap. It's kind of all over the place here with the trade deadline. So it is a very, very tough thing. But let's transition away from that. Talking about the NBA All-Star break. Obviously, some of these teams looking ahead to a break. Some of these teams don't want the break because they're playing really well. And some of these teams want the break because to get away from the court would be a godsend at this point in time. You're looking at teams like the Knicks, teams like the Bulls, maybe even teams like the Cavaliers. So in terms of the All-Star break, Wes, is that, an actionable betting angle for you one way or another?
I think it is. I mean, it depends on the team, of course. And with the season starting earlier and the All-Star break, really being later than ever, it's going to be next weekend. And I just think that, these so many games. I mean, obviously the other All-Star breaks, in hockey and in baseball, it's pretty much right at the middle of the season, give or take a couple games. But, these teams are going to have played, just a little bit less than 60 games. A lot of these teams, have played 53, 54, 55 some games. And, the break comes so late in the season now. And that's, I think, another thing that's made the NBA, something that you really had to adjust to. And I've been a little slow to adjust to, not just the way that the game is played on the court in terms of, you know, the kind of this space and pace basketball that the Warriors and a couple other of these teams are playing, but also the fact that the season is so different. I mean, it's not starting November 1st anymore, and then the All-Star break is, you know, right after the Super Bowl or in late January before that happens. You know, it's now very late into February, and these teams have played almost, you know, 2/3 to 3/4 of the season. So, you know, some of these teams might be running out a little bit of gas, you know, especially some of the bad teams. And then when you've got the teams dealing with injury issues, they're the team, you know, the teams that probably need the break the most, the teams that aren't healthy. And that's why you're seeing all these, you know, why you kind of got to wait a little bit to game day to play a lot of these games, because you have, you know, so many injuries or so many rests, you know, whether Kawhi Leonard's resting for Toronto or Chris Paul is resting for Houston or what have you. And it is tough a little bit to get a little bit of a rhythm, because you've got to see what team is going to be healthy on any given night.
Now, I want to transition to a different level of basketball here and talk college for just a couple of minutes. A lot of teams playing an opponent for the second time now in conference play. You've got a lot of rematch games, a lot of revenge games. I'm sure you have to handicap those at least a little bit differently. So what are you looking for in that second meeting between two teams?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I like to look for is if a team lost at home in the first meeting and have had a little bit of success with it, you know, playing the first half for the team maybe that lost at home, especially in some of these, you know, middle to lower major type conferences, you know, where the talent gap is virtually nil, and you basically have the same level of personnel. You know, it's obviously different if you have a top team in the Big Ten like a Michigan against a Penn State or something where there's going to be a little bit of a talent gap. But, you know, you're also looking at some of these teams that are winning a lot. And one of the interesting things is now that the NFL is officially over, you have some new money that is going to enter in the market. Some of it is probably even going to wait until like either the conference tournaments or even the NCAA tournament for that matter. A new sport to bet on for some people that have been kind of, you know, balls deep into football all year. And now they're entering and kind of surveying the landscape and looking at the teams that are winning and, you know, where you can get a little bit of inflated lines. And I'll talk about this a little bit of what I saw last night as an example. These teams that are big favorites in conference play, especially these highly ranked teams, you're seeing teams, I think, hang in the first half. And you saw that last night with Boston College at Duke. Boston College actually led the game going into halftime, and then they barely missed covering at the end. I mean, they're up by 2 at the half, and Duke still covers 24 and wins by 25 at the end, as Boston College had a couple cracks to kind of stay within the number on that last possession, getting an offensive rebound, and didn't do it. You saw it with Missouri at Tennessee, and Missouri ended up actually covering the full game. So you're seeing, I think, a lot of these bigger favorites, you know, Michigan State aside, who ended up losing the game outright and, you know, kind of hit the skids a little bit the last couple of games, but you're starting to see these lines get inflated, and I'll be interested. I think there's a couple scenarios tonight where you can look at that, one being Nevada, Colorado State. That's not necessarily saying to play it, but, you know, maybe a team like Colorado State, I mean, that's their game of the year. That's clearly the best team in the Mountain West Conference coming into your building. Colorado State's kind of a middle team in the league, you know, not that great, certainly not an at-large candidate. So, you know, this is going to be their big game. And you look at Villanova going to Creighton, who kind of has seemingly got right lately. Villanova's won a bunch in a row. You know, maybe you're going to see these teams hang in the first half, and Gonzaga will be a perfect example to look at going forward in the West Coast Conference, because they're going to be big favorites every single game, even against decent teams like St. Mary's and San Francisco. So, maybe looking at that first half, because they're starting to get into the grind of the season now. I mean, you've played conference play, and, you're a month away from these conference tournaments. So, the grind of a season can wear on a team. And if a team has won just so many in a row, it's only natural that you're never going to have the same team twice, and you're going to hit some flat spots. And you kind of saw that a little bit with, Tennessee last night.
Yeah, and also you mentioned Nevada, and this is a game I mentioned in my video over on YouTube with a look ahead to the weekend. Nevada gets that revenge crack against New Mexico on Saturday. So they're definitely looking ahead to that game. Maybe it does hurt them here in the first half tonight in Fort Collins against Colorado State. I think it's a really good angle that you mentioned there, Wes. One more sport I want to talk about with you here on this segment. As we transition over to the golf side of things here, for the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, very unique event, teams of pros and amateurs, as the name implies. 3 different courses in play because you've got about 900 guys trying to complete 18 holes here with this event. So this is a really tough handicap. So do you kind of keep it a little bit lighter with your exposure, or do you just dive head first?
A little bit. I mean, I will probably play a mixed bag. I won't play a lot of short prices here, even though short prices have won here in the past with Dustin Johnson and Jordan Spieth. But you've had some bombs win here, especially last year. Ted Potter Jr. was at least 300 to 1. Vaughn Taylor has won, Aaron Oberholzer. So you don't always necessarily see the class players here. And I think because of the format of this field, it brings a lot of guys into play. And I mean, and then you're weighing the difficulty of the 3 courses. Over the last several years, Spyglass Hill has probably been the toughest course. Pebble and Monterey have been really equal. I mean, weather, they've had some bad weather out there, so it's going to be interesting to see how these courses play, if they're extra soft, if it's, it's going to be chilly out there. I mean, it's been chilly out here on the West Coast. I say this in jest, with the Midwest who are buried under feet of snow, but, I mean, it's been in the 40s out here, and the wind's been blowing. So, it's going to be interesting. And then you have to look at, maybe some previous history. I mean, typically guys that win here, guys that have had good finishes here, guys that have had top 10s, top 20s. So, that's a little bit what I looked at. I mean, he could surely win it, but I surely couldn't take Dustin Johnson at 4 to 1 or 5 to 1. Considering he won last week. He's coming all the way from Saudi Arabia. He's been over in the Middle East for a few weeks. You saw that last week in the Saudi International where Justin Rose, who just won at Torrey Pines and played very well, went over to Saudi Arabia and missed the cut. So, you look a little bit down the board here, and guys I looked at Patrick Cantlay, who I took, who I think is off to a decent start. He's kind of struggled a little bit with the putting, but I think his ball striking's been pretty solid. Patrick Cantlay. Brent Snedeker is another guy that I think you're getting a really good price on, especially if it's 40 to 1 or higher, who has won here a couple times, who always plays well here. Hasn't really been in contention much yet this year, but, kind of a horse for a course. And then there's the correlation with Torrey Pines where he's also won. So, guys that play really well on the West Coast. But, I took some longer shots as well, guys like Joel Bayman, guys like Nick Watney, who has a pretty good history here and some really good finishes. But there's so many different dynamics here, Adam. I mean, with, some guys I think relish playing with the celebrity and some guys don't. And if you look at kind of the way the pairings are, probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of the celebrity flight are going to play Pebble Beach on Saturday. So that means they're going to start at Monterey on Thursday, play Spyglass on Friday, and then play Pebble on Saturday. So, and a lot of these pros too, the chief thing for them is to obviously win the tournament because this is their career and livelihood. But these guys do want to make the cut in the Pro-Am, whether they're playing with some executive or it's somebody that represents one of their sponsors or a corporation in their hometown or whatever. So, that's what I think makes, there's a lot of things that make this an interesting tournament to handicap.
Yeah, and another wrinkle to this tournament as well, and something we talked about yesterday with Brian Blessing, is that Pebble Beach will host the U.S. Open this year. So you've got guys that obviously want to play well this weekend, but you got some guys, and we kind of isolated one on yesterday's show talking about Patrick Reed. I don't think Patrick Reed really cares that much about the Pro-Am this weekend. I think he just wants to get some mental notes for Pebble Beach for the U.S. Open. So maybe that opens up some matchup betting possibilities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the course, for a U.S. Open is going to be set up more difficult than this week is. But, this isn't a course where the weather's not going to be perfect this week. There may be some soft conditions, but I don't see the scoring, 20 under or anything like that. You're probably, I think, going to end up getting low teens this week, which I think opens it up where it's not just some birdie fest here. And, the wind can play some havoc. So, typically you like to bag guys here that have a little bit of a history here, even though there was one guy that I bet that I just think has kind of seemingly found something. That was Brandon Grace, who ended up finishing second last week, even though he had the lead in the final round when Ricky Fowler struggled early in the round. But he's got a new caddy. There's a little bit of a connection here. Chambers Bay, where the U.S. Open was a couple years ago, even though the greens were terrible up there and there's all that fescue and all that stuff, there's a little bit of parallel to this course. So you look at the guys that were contended for the win up there, Jordan Spieth, Dustin Johnson, who both have won on this course, and also Brandon Grace was right in the mix there. So, even though he doesn't have a long history here, he was a guy certainly looked at as well as Shane Lowry, who was close last year to winning this event and already has a win this year at Abu Dhabi. Also went a caddy change in the late season and the off season. So some of those guys, I think maybe they've been a little bit here, and that's why I look at them.
Last thing I want to ask you about here, I don't know if any books are going to have props on how amateurs finish. I imagine there's a chance that there are some books out there that do have some things like that. Look, there are some guys in this thing like Bill Murray and Larry the Cable Guy who, they're probably decent golfers. They're not going to go out there and win anything from a team standpoint or anything like that. And quite frankly, they're probably a little bit tougher to play with, just by nature of their personalities. But there are some amateurs in this thing that are really damn good players.
Yeah, Tony Romo has played. Now, interestingly enough, when I looked at the pairings, he is not in the Saturday Pebble Beach flight. He's actually partnered with Jim Furyk in this thing this week. But yeah, Tony Romo is very good, and then there are guys that are improving. And you mentioned Bill Murray. DA Points won this event several years ago with Bill Murray as his partner, and a lot of that stuff too, because that's what the people want to see, and that's what the TV wants to show. They want to see the guys cracking jokes and being funny, and Bill Murray taking the old lady and diving in the sand trap. Well, that usually happens on Thursday or Friday. When it comes to Sunday, especially if these guys have made the cut, they get serious, and they kind of try to stay out of the PGA player's way, especially if that player is really in contention. So, a lot of this is obviously the show, and that's what you're going to see on Saturday. You're going to see a lot more celebrity shots, and, some of the guys that are going to be in contention aren't going to be on Pebble on Saturday, and they're not going to have a lot of cameras out there maybe at Spyglass or Monterey because the TV coverage is so focused on the Pro-Am portion on Saturday. So, there's going to be less galleries at these other two courses on Saturday and less cameras. So, there's going to be some guys that are in contention that don't have the distractions. So, in terms of a course correlation over the last 6 years, I believe 3 winners started on Monterey and finished the flight on Saturday at Pebble Beach. And then the 3 other years, it was starting at Pebble Beach and then playing on the other 2 courses before everybody hits Pebble on Sunday.
Wes Reynolds is working to follow on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Appreciate the time as always, Wes. Thank you so much, man. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, man. Always a pleasure, Adam.